Morning, Fellowship Fayetteville. How are we? All right. We got a lot of ground to cover and not much time today, okay? My name's Garland. Glad to be with you. Let me give you one more announcement just for you to know. We've been participating in a 90 days of prayer around here on Thursdays around lunchtime in this room. And as part of that, let me just invite you, if you're free tonight, if you are available, if you're in town, come join us. We're going to pray tonight downtown, and we're just going to go to the West Avenue parking garage. It's the one right across from Hammond Trees, the new one, and we're going to meet on the top floor, 5:30 to 6:30. We're going to be prompt on both the start and the end, and if it's raining, we'll just go one level down. That will be covered. But we're just going to invite you to come and pray with us. It's you can see the kind of the whole downtown city from there. We're just going to pray for different things while we're there. Pray for direction for our church. Pray for the Lord to work in and through our church and the other churches in this city to bring the gospel here to our city and our city around us. So join us tonight. We're continuing in our Mark series, as you heard. Now, how many of you have been enjoying the Gospel of Mark along the way so far? Those of you that didn't raise your hand, you're like, I should have raised my hand. Some of you are still clapping. How many of you enjoyed Mark so far? All right, yeah. Some of you are like booing, boo, no. We're going to get a turn today, all right? Even in the passage that you just heard, the tone is going to shift pretty drastically. And just to tee this up for us, let me get us thinking. There have been moments historically, moments of real significance, moments that were loaded with symbolism that everyone there knew what was going on. Like, let me give you an example. This is just a random stream, just a random river. It's in northern Italy. And in 49 BC, a man crossed it with some of his friends and basically changed Western culture. It's loaded with significance. This isn't just any river. This is the Rubicon River in northern Italy, and this is the river that Julius Caesar and his army crossed in 49 BC. There was a law that said no general could go past the Rubicon River into Italy without consent from the Senate. And Caesar crossed the Rubicon. And you know everyone there knew exactly what he was doing, and everybody in Rome knew what he was doing. Almost 2,000 years later, a group of people gathered together, in a room in 1776, and all they were doing was signing a piece of paper. I mean, how many times do you sign things in your life? Just sign your name. And yet this was a moment of no turning back. Like this was a put up or shut up kind of moment. And everyone there knew by taking the pen and signing your name what it meant. It might have some consequences, good and bad. What we're going to see in our passage this morning is Jesus stepping into one of those moments. In fact, he's orchestrating it to get the reaction. But here's the reaction. By the end of our passage this morning, the Jesus that we've been studying all these 10 chapters thus far, who says, I didn't come to be served, but to serve and give my life as a ransom. By the end of this passage today, they're going to be saying, kill him. We got to take him out. And Jesus is orchestrating the whole thing. We're going to look this morning at what we're calling the king's arrival. Now, we've got all sorts of names for this passage. Palm Sunday, triumphal entry, the cleansing of the temple, and all those are fine. But I think sometimes we miss the symbolic significance of what's going on here. We also miss, this is a no turning back kind of moment. By the end of this story today, there's only two options for the people in Jerusalem when it comes to Jesus. Crown him or kill him. His actions will put their feet to the fire. He's in their face, and he's orchestrating the whole thing. They're going to interpret him as a real threat, a real problem. He's a political problem. He's a religious problem. Now, with that as our intro, I told you the tone's changing today. Let's dive in. Mark chapter 11. If you have your Bibles, go there with me. Mark chapter 11. This is a great week to check out sermon notes because there is so much in this passage. You just cannot cover it all in 30 minutes or so. And so sermon notes, wherever you get your podcast, check it out. And it just give you some of the added pieces of the puzzle of this story. It's familiar if you grew up in church. because we do it on Palm Sunday every year, but it's loaded. And I want you to see there's a reason they want to kill him. What I'm going to do is we're going to walk through both these things, and then I'm going to try to give us an implication for our life today. Here's where we're going. All right, Mark 11. Notice, Jesus has been, as Mark presents it, on his way to Jerusalem. He's got a date with destiny, we might say, in Jerusalem. This is the only time in Mark's gospel that we see Jesus going up to Jerusalem, right here. So how will Jesus respond when he goes to this ever-important city, the capital city, the center of the world from a Jewish imagination? Well, he's going to orchestrate a very purposeful statement. It's going to be very clear. How does he orchestrate it? First, he chooses the place of entry. Notice it says the Mount of Olives. Now, this is just a snapshot of the Mount of Olives right there. This is taken from the Temple Mount. It's east of the temple in Jerusalem. And it was a regular place for people to come into town. It's not all that significant that he came in from the east. However, Mark signals it for us. Mark writes it down. Right in your Bible next to Mount of Olives. You can just write this down. Zechariah 14, Ezekiel 11, and Ezekiel 43. Zechariah 14. This is the spot where Yahweh's king would come and stand and present himself to the nation. And in Ezekiel 11 and 43, this is where the glory of Yahweh returns. And Mark says he comes in on the Mount of Olives, by the way. Not just the place of entry, Jesus is incredibly intentional with the mode of transportation. I know it's familiar, but go read the Gospels. Jesus is always on foot. He's always walking. And all the thousands coming into town for Passover, most of them are walking on foot. And yet, in this one instance, Jesus is incredibly deliberate. In fact, it seems as if he's either supernaturally set it up or maybe he has some kind of arrangement he's made. He goes, go in there, you'll find it, send for it, bring it here. He rides in on an animal. Highly unusual for Jesus, very weird. What's he signaling? Now, again, because it's familiar, I think we can kind of miss some of the significance of this. Almost certainly, he's signaling Zechariah chapter 9. Now, notice it again, it's Zechariah. This is the announcement that the king is coming, the victorious king. But he's not just the righteous and victorious king. He's also the humble, lowly one who shows up in the most ridiculous kind of way. I mean, I'm not a rancher, farmer. I don't have a lot of experience. But donkeys are just kind of ridiculous. Like when you see them, you're like, that's a weird thing. It's a weird creature. And it's not just a donkey. It's like a baby donkey. This is the way the king is coming in. But notice when he comes, the battle bow is broken and peace comes to the nations. I mean, Jesus is signaling here. He's telegraphing his pass. He's deliberate with all the symbolism. And notice again also, as he comes into town, he allows his followers, he allows his disciples, he allows his group that's traveled with him to go public. When you read the Gospels up to this point, we've even showed you in Mark's Gospel, Jesus he keeps telling people, don't tell, keep it a secret, don't tell about this, don't tell about that. And yet here, he lets his followers go forward, and they're shouting from Psalm 118 and saying, this is him. They're taking symbols of the nation, branches, palm branches, and laying them in front of him. Now, Matthew's gospel makes it even clearer, but it's clear here in Mark. This isn't the crowds in Jerusalem responding to him. This is his group going ahead of him, shouting, here he is. It's incredibly public. It's in their face. He's giving them a moment of decision. And for those in Jerusalem, they see the political significance of this. They recognize that Jesus is forcing their hand. It's deliberate, it's public, it's intentional, and it's symbolic, and they get it. There's only two options because of what Jesus is doing. Crown me as your king, or kill me as a lunatic, as an imposter. What will it be? He's a real political problem. Now, let me just highlight two things, though, before we move on. The first is something that always gets highlighted, so I'll be brief. We love to highlight the meekness of the entry, right? The donkey. And in countless sermons, I've probably given one, we highlight he's the humble king, and rightfully so. He's the lowly one who comes in not on a war victory horse, but on a ridiculous baby donkey. Like it's intentionally lowly. And Zechariah even said so. And I think it's easy for us to accentuate the meekness of Jesus meek and mild. And when I was, working on this a couple weeks ago, I just started, Google image searching, Palm Sunday, Jesus coming into the temple, Jesus the donkey, Jesus meek, and all these things. And oftentimes, I think because we think about Jesus meek and mild, it can create a picture for us of something like this when we think about Jesus. Of course, he's white with hair that's like highlighted, but he's always holding the lambs, and he's sweet, and he's meek, and he's quiet, and he's calm. Or he's coming into town, he's like, hey, here I am. I'm just here to hang with you. Check this out. My favorite one was this, and I kid you not, this was just a simple Google image search. I think it was either Palm Sunday or Triumphal Entry or something like this. This was my favorite one. This thing is amazing. Aaron Parks pointed out, it's got to be AI generated. There's so many problems with this. First of all, the guy on the left here is wearing like a regular collared shirt. Notice? And then that guy in the back's got a t-shirt on. I don't understand what's going on here. I call this bro Jesus. He's just sort of like, he's just your bro. And I think for many of us, and I think we're tempted even culturally, maybe you're here this morning, you're going, that's the version of Jesus I'm okay with. I'm comfortable with bro Jesus. The Jesus who looks like he just came off the beach. He wants to have a good time. He wants me to have a good time. He wants me to just discover myself and enjoy life and have a good time. And he likes me. He loves me. He's for me. And that's Jesus. And by the way, it's right for us to highlight Jesus, his humility. We said last week, we saw it. He said, I did not come to be served, but to serve and give my life as a ransom for many. Yet when we do that, we can sometimes miss, I think. So hear me. Yes, he's meek, but he's also demanding. I mean, he comes in forcing their hand. Yes, he's humble. He's also righteous. Yes, he's lowly, but he's also in your face. Let me put it to you this way. How do you know you've met the real Jesus? He pushes you. Yes, he loves you, but he pushes you. Now, I say it frequently, and he just says it better than me, so I'll just let him say it. Tim Keller says it this way, and we got to wrestle with this morning. He says, if your God never disagrees with you, never pushes you, never challenges you, never pushes back, is never in your face, when you have a position on an issue, social issue, that's God's position. When you change your position, he changes his position too. If your God never disagrees with you, he says, it may not be God you're worshiping, but an idealized version of yourself. I'll say it even harsher. You may not have a God at all, but you've made yourself God, or you've made a God in your own image. How do you know you've met the real Jesus? He pushes you. And he loves you. He makes claims on your life. Your time, your money, your body, your sexuality, your weekends, your Friday nights and Saturday nights, your business practices, what comes out of your mouth, your parenting, your eyes and what you look at. He makes claims on all of it. He pushes you because he wants to conform you more into his image, because that's where rest is found for your soul. That's how you know you've met the real Jesus. As he comes in to Jerusalem, yes, he's meek, but he is making demands, and it's a real political problem. But he's also a religious problem. Now, this is a bit of a false dichotomy here. In the ancient world, in fact, in the modern world, it's impossible to separate your worldview, your beliefs, from your public interaction. That's what political means. It's impossible to separate those, even though in the modern world we pretend that we can. And we say, don't bring your worldview in here, but everybody's doing it. In the ancient world, they didn't even pretend. You couldn't separate these two things. Religion and public and politic all went together. So it's a bit of a false dichotomy, but go here with me anyway. What do I mean by the religious problem? To understand this, we've got to recognize the importance of place. The ancient people, in the ancient Near Eastern imagination, place was very significant. See, certain places were associated with the divine. They were associated with the spiritual world. There were certain places where it seemed as if like heaven and earth came together. And that's where you would put altars and temples and places of worship to meet with the divine. And by the way, I don't think that's that far from our imagination, even as modern people. Let me give you a good example, like the Buffalo River. Many of you probably have a spot at the Buffalo. I know I do. And sometimes when you go there, it doesn't feels otherworldly, does it not? It almost feels like you stepped into a portal to a different dimension. And especially depending on if the weather's beautiful, you got a sunrise, a sunset. There's certain places that you go on the Buffalo, you just go, this is sacred. I'm interacting here with more than just this world. It's like God's here. Maybe it's not the Buffalo. Maybe you're like a beach person and you've got like your spot on the beach and you're like, okay, that's where, man, I just feel like I just meet with the Lord there in a different way. Now, I put 30 up here for a reason. You all know, like, there's like 38 people in the world. Like, they're the 38 kind of person. And here's the deal. How do you know you've met a 38 person? They'll tell you. They won't be able to help themselves. Especially if you bring up any other vacation anywhere else in the world. That's when they're going to tell you especially. So you could say, hey, I just came back from a month-long trip from southern Italy. We were on the coast, the Amalfi Coast in Sorrento and Positano. We were eating prosciutto straight from a farm. The most beautiful, kings used to vacation there. And they'll be like, have you been to Rosemary? Because what you just described is nothing compared to Rosemary. So you'll know, they'll put it on their car. Some of you are this person. Tone it down, please, all right? Just tone it down. It's fine, it's great. Settle down. What about this place? There's a sacredness to it. And here's the deal. I think we're winning a lot this next year, okay? But regardless of that, think about it. We come together corporately. We perform in certain rituals that we do every year that we were trained to do since childhood. And then we worship. It's almost there's a sacredness to it. I get goosebumps sometimes when the Razorbacks come out of the A. What is that? Something sacred about the place. Now, in the ancient world, this was ratcheted up to 11, all right? And the Jews were no different. For them, this is sacred space. The temple in Jerusalem, the Temple Mount, this is where Yahweh has staked a claim. This is where Yahweh's presence is. And in the ancient world, they're always putting altars and temples in the presence of deity because that's where the deity dwells. The temple, it's the location of the presence of Yahweh. His presence is here. And if his presence is here, then his power is here. We can commune with him and experience his power. By the time that Jesus is coming into the temple, we see this is the place where provision is made to cleanse the temple from our filth and to cleanse us. It's called the sacrificial system. And also this gives the ancient Jewish community their purpose. Because we are Yahweh's people and we're in special relationship to him, he now invites us to be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation, to bless the nations around us. That's what they're supposed to be. And it's all wrapped up in this place. I mean, it's the center of the world for the Jewish imagination. How's Jesus going to respond? Notice, and you might not have seen it, Mark presents it a little differently than Matthew, Luke, and John. In Mark's gospel, he rides into town, he goes down to the temple, and it says he looks around. But then he leaves. So Mark's is a little bit different than the other three. How would you like that, by the way? Jesus shows up, looks at fellowship, and just looks around. What might he say, I wonder? I don't know. I have my hopes and I have my fears. Looks at me, looks around. Let's take a survey. But then he leaves. It is the next day that he comes back. Now, Mark is highlighting how deliberate this is. I mean, he's highlighted, like Jesus had time to think about it. And as he comes in, how will the king respond to this, the most sacred place? He freaks out. Look at what happens. This is the only time we ever see Jesus get close to what we might call violent. Look at the verbs. He comes in and starts driving out people. He's overturning tables. He's not allowing them to carry things. It's loud. It's public. It's forceful. Now, just to get a picture of this is the kind of a drawing of the temple precinct, and it's impossible to get a sense of the scale. If you've been there, you know the entire precinct area is about 36 acres. So this whole property from the road to the back road is about 27 acres. So it's bigger than this whole thing, and it is packed with people. Tens of thousands of people are coming into town for Passover from all over the Roman world. If you've ever been to Times Square, you got a little bit of a taste of it. And there's all sorts of hustle and bustle and commercial activity that needs to take place for people to be able to make a sacrifice for Passover. So imagine, packed full of people. And in that crowded area, that's where Jesus goes in and goes wild. Driving people out of there, overturning tables. Imagine the scene. And to get worse, to make matters worse, look at what he says. There's a verb switch. It's hard to pick up in English. The verb switches to, and he taught. I would probably go with, and he was teaching them. He's saying it over and over again. He quotes from two places, Isaiah 56, and then Jeremiah 7. You've made my house a den of robbers. Jeremiah 7. It's called Jeremiah's Temple Sermon. Go read it this week. Jeremiah 7. It ain't pretty. Jeremiah was a prophet about 600 years before Jesus, and he looked at the nation in his day, the Israel of his day, right before they go into exile, and he condemned them for idolatry and injustice. Idolatry and injustice. And it was harsh. And the people are saying, well, we got the temple. Yahweh's with us. We have the temple, the temple, the temple. And Jeremiah says, it's going down because y'all are broken. And Jesus starts running around saying that. This is a real problem. And we can understand the problem when we see what this little story with the fig tree represents. We ended the reading earlier with that, and my bet is if you have never heard this story, or even if it's you haven't heard it in a long time, verses 12 to 14 kind of makes Jesus look bad. He goes up to a tree. It's not the season for the tree. It doesn't have any fruit. He curses it, and then later they find out it died overnight from the roots up. He kills the tree. And I'll just be honest, if you're an outsider to this story, it is weird. It sounds weird. And maybe when you first read it, you're like, that's a little harsh, Jesus. You just killed this tree for doing something it couldn't do. Notice, first, right down next to this passage, Micah 7, verse 1. Jesus is signaling them to the book of Micah. Again, sermon notes. We don't have time for all this morning. But additionally, notice it. It's the dormant season for figs, yet this one looks like it's fruitful. Looks in season. It's unusual, and it catches his eye. Upon approaching it, it's not the season, but this one looks the part of fruitfulness, but he gets there's no fruit. It looks good, no fruit. See, this is literally a symbolic picture of the nation of Israel. They're supposed to be a fruit tree in a sea of nations that are dead. And they look the part. He's at the temple. Everything looks right. But as he gets close and sees, there's no fruit. Now, time out. I don't want to belabor it because I don't want to feel more convicted. Would that not be the worst thing you could hear about you? How would you like to hear that? You really look the religious part, there's no fruit. How would you want to hear that about our church or the church in the West? Look super religious, lot of activity, no fruitful heart of compassion and justice and mercy and love for God, love for neighbor. Time back in. I can't handle that. All right, I don't want to think about that. All right. Looks the part, but fruitless. There's a reason they want to kill him. You see what he's doing? Yes, it's the triumphal entry, cleansing of the temple, Palm Sunday, we have all these little cute names for it. This is a harsh, symbolic, prophetic announcement of judgment on the Israel of his day. They fell victim to the very same idolatry and injustice of the nations, and instead of being a blessing to the nations, they became corrupted just like them. And to make matters even stranger, Jesus is going to start using really weird language. We got to go to John's gospel to see it. But he says, tear down that temple, and I'll raise it in 3 days. And they go, what's wrong with you? And later on, the disciples tell us he's talking about his body. Jesus, as he's bringing this announcement of judgment on the temple, and by the way, it's going to get worse when we get to Mark 13. He's about to say it even harsher. He starts talking about building a new temple in its place, the temple of his body. What? What's wrong with you, Jesus? What are you talking about? He'll start saying, like, all the things that you imagine the temple is for, it's found in me. You're looking for Yahweh there. Yahweh is in your midst. There's a reason they want him dead. Crown me or kill me. Now let's do a little work as we close for our implication on this one. If you can lean in for the next 3 or 4 minutes, it very well might change the way you live your life. I promise I'm not overstating it. It took me years of following Jesus to finally realize the implications of this. I want you to see it. Give me 3 minutes. See, Jesus is saying something incredibly strange. The presence of Yahweh is not in the building, it's him. And that the power of Yahweh is in him, and he's providing. He'll provide the sacrifice. He gives new purpose. The thing that they were purposed for, it'll now be absorbed in him and those who would follow him. He's been saying it all throughout Mark's gospel, especially the last 3 chapters. But notice, a few weeks later, he'll say something even stranger. It's in Acts 1:8. As he begins to ascend to take his place at the right hand of God on his throne, notice the language. Does it sound familiar to those words we just saw? Power, purpose, presence. He says, you will receive power when the presence of God, of the Holy Spirit, comes upon you. And then I got a purpose for you. You will be my witnesses. You will bring the glory of Yahweh out to all of the nations. Remember what happens? 1 chapter over, chapter 2 of Acts. There they gather. Some say even at the temple. You know, Yahweh shows up in the Old Testament as cloud or fire. Clouds fill the area where they're at, and then fire comes down, but it doesn't go to the temple. They're in Jerusalem. No. It comes down and rests on each one of them. Are you tracking Jesus followers with me? I didn't hear what? Are you tracking? I'll let Peter tell it for you. See, Jesus starts talking about building a new temple. And Peter will say, as you come to him, the living stone, Jesus, rejected by humans but chosen by God, you also, like living stones, are being built into a temple, a spiritual house, to be a holy priesthood offering spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. Now, this is the part that I think very well may change how you view your entire life. Lean in, Jesus followers. Where do you go to see the presence of God? It ain't this room, by the way. If somebody in our city wants to see the presence of Yahweh, the New Testament would say, look around. The power of God in the world to bring his healing and goodness and beauty. Look around. The purpose that this church now has, not just our church, but the church universal, is to do everything that we can to declare the praises of him. And it doesn't just mean singing songs at church and having our quiet time in the morning. Hear it. Every single thing you do now, your job, your skills, your passions, your hobbies, your weekends, your friendships, your dating, your parenting, your marriage, all of it is now tethered to this idea of worship. It's not go do your life out there, then come do your church stuff in here. No, all of it now connects. Everything we do now has a higher calling in a sense. Here's how Paul says it. This is temple language. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. This is worship. Everything we do is now worship. And not in the cute little sense of we come to church and sing songs. No. It gives a different significance to how you interact with your heart as child today. This is why Paul will use language like, your sexuality matters because you're a temple. What you let into your eyes and brain matter because you are the temple. This is where God shows off in the world. Do you believe it? Do you see it? Do we live like it? It took me years to get this. And then the false dichotomy of church time and then the rest of my time began to fall away a little bit. Here's how we close. I love stories, and I read some this past week of like when soldiers go through like training, and then they put on especially the full military regalia for the first time. And they almost all to a T say the same thing. They'll say, when I put that uniform on and looked in the mirror, and some of you have had this experience, they'll say, I had to step back because I realized something just changed about me. Like my very identity just changed. The privilege that I have to represent something way bigger than just me. What it's asking of me, the responsibility. I represent what this stands for. By the way, the same thing's true of athletes. First time they put on the Yankee uniform, or the first time they put on the Laker jersey, or maybe you've had that experience when first time you put on like your doctor's clothing when you went in to med school, and you're like, man, am I this now? Or you put on your graduation, cap and gown and all that stuff, and you turned it over, it's something different. See, this is our new identity. This is our new purpose. Like, is this not amazing? This is what we've been invited into. Jesus pronounced this a symbolic judgment on the Israel of his day. And then says, I'm going to build a new temple. It's where God's going to be. It's where his power is on display. Now hear me. Don't miss provision. Don't miss provision. None of you, and definitely not me, we aren't worthy to be called temple in ourselves. Presence of God has no right to be anywhere near any of us, actually, if we really want to look at our lives. And yet, Jesus takes our broken, nasty, filthy rags and he cleans us and exchanges us and says, you can be temple now. He takes our shameful, idolatrous, unjust part. He says, I'll take that on the cross and you can go walk in glory and honor. Don't you see? His provision has enabled us to now be called the dwelling place of God. And now we are caught up in that grand purpose of bringing his goodness and power to the world. That's our calling. And may we get a little taste of it right now as we stand to sing. So, temple, let's do what we're supposed to do. Let's stand. Let's worship, shall we?